Hello again, painters. Welcome to Watercolors with Caroline and our spring lessons. Our theme for this spring is Canada Coast to Coast. So we have projects from different provinces and photos from friends and friends of friends. So thank you to all of those people who've submitted their photos. Our first one is Moon Rising in Tofino by Gillian Marshall. So get your paints, get your paper, and let's get started. Right, so here we are. We are going to do a pretty easy one to start with, photographed by a friend of a friend, and this was taken in Tofino. So a lot of you may not have the colors that I have, so don't worry. I've done a sort of a chart here, and you could make something very similar to a Prussian blue. So and I also did this one with ultramarine blue, just to test which one I liked better. The Prussian blue was just closer to the photograph, which is why I went with the Prussian blue. You can see that the ultramarine is warmer, but it still looks okay. Now, this is what happens if you forget to cut the bottom off your sticker. You never get rid of this moon shape. And I made a mistake on my first one. Beginner mistake, rookie mistake, and that's why I have to get my scissors. I have to cut the bottom off of my little moon, and we'll get that moon in position just about right here. I'm going to give it a good press down so that it's well stuck. I don't want the paint going under it like it did the other day. And I just move some of this out of the way. Now we're going to put our first wash on here, and then we're going to put that aside to dry and soak into the paper. And we're going to do the triad exercise. Now I have a journal that I'm keeping with my triads in. So we're going to do one of the little things like the drawing I sent you, and I'll show you how to set that up. And we'll work on that while our wash is all sinking into the paper and starting to dry. So that will give us a little bit of time for that to happen. Also, if you're a first-time person here, you may not know how to get ready for the lesson, and that's fine. What is really good is if you can take the drawing I sent you and either draw it freehand or trace it through a light board or put it up on a window and trace it, and then use some masking tape to tape it down to a board. Now, this is a very lightweight Coroplast board. It was an election sign. Somebody gave me a whole bunch of election signs, and it's lovely and lightweight and easy to tape to. My masking tape is from Dollar Tree, very cheap. It shouldn't really be green. It should be beige, but I have to save money, so it's green. And the reason for that is they say it affects your color choices not to have a very neutral color. We'll just have to work with that and not worry about it. I have to say I never worried about it until somebody told me that. Now I worry about it. But we're not going to have something hanging in the National Gallery, so I wouldn't worry. Let's put my dots aside. Right, so first of all, I just want to go over a couple of mixes you could use instead of Prussian blue. I'll put on my paper here, I'll put what Prussian blue looks like. It's kind of a dark, cool blue. This is very cheap paper, so it doesn't look as great on the cheap paper as the good paper. So there's my Prussian blue as a sort of a gauge for what we're trying to mix. Then I'm going to take some, let's bring my mixing tray over, take some ultramarine blue, which is a warm blue. I'm going to add a little bit of phthalo blue, if you have it. I don't know if you do. And I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's gray to that. And then I'm going to see if that comes anywhere close to the Prussian. It's still a bit it's a bit too warm still. So I'm going to add a little bit more phthalo blue. And I'm going to try that. Now that's getting a little bit closer to the Prussian. So it's quite a cool blue. I'm going to try just phthalo blue and Payne's gray. And I'm going to try that one. Oh, that's very close. So just phthalo blue and Payne's gray is very, very close to the Prussian. If you don't have phthalo blue, You could try and cool down your ultramarine. So, because ultramarine is very warm, you could try and cool it down with a little bit of yellow to a greeny blue, and then add a bit of Payne's gray and try that. It's a little bit too gray. Probably need a little bit more blue in that. There, a little bit more blue. It's still not quite as good as this one was just phthalo blue and Payne's gray, but it doesn't matter as long as you have a nice blue going on, that's okay. Just do what you can. Let's pop that to one side. That's a very cheap paper that I use for just color mixing. Right, so I'm going to get a bigger brush. This is my number 10 brush. And I want to wet all of my paper. Now I'm using 140-pound Arches cotton paper. And I want to wet it all over. And I have to be careful when I go near that sticker because I don't want the water to go underneath it. So I have to be a little bit careful that I don't make that too wet. Doesn't usually, but I did the other day in class, the paint went underneath. So I have to put that in. Now, when you do a wet in wet, it's really important to just tip your paper and make sure the wet is everywhere. There's a dry spot here. And if you have cotton paper, you need to let that water soak in. Now, if you don't have cotton paper, if you have pulp paper, it will dry very quickly. So you may have to re-wet before you carry on. And what I want to do before I start painting is I want to get my pink color over here for my pinky orangey color for the moon reflection. So I have some yellow. Now I use Azo Yellow that's made by M. Graham. I just love that color. You may not have it. So if you have cadmium yellow, transparent yellow, Hansa yellow, any of those yellows, they're going to be fine. You know, just a nice bright yellow. This just happens to be the one I always use because I love it. And I'm going to get some permanent rose, which is also quinacridone rose. Now, Winsor & Newton is my favorite brand for permanent rose. And they call it permanent rose, but every other brand calls it quinacridone rose. So they are exactly the same. Add a little bit more yellow into that. And I want some rose all by itself. There's some rose. I just find the Winsor & Newton one to be more transparent and more beautiful. So I now have my number 6 brush. And before I put any of the blue in, I want to put right under, let's zoom in a little bit, right under where the moon will be reflecting. So figure out where your moon is. I want to put in some of that orange and pink. I'm going to go side to side. I got a little bit of that orange mix, a bit of that pink mix. I'm going to go side to side and put that in to the wet background. It will all kind of diffuse. That's what you want to happen. And quite light. And I might take a little bit of the pink over here. This is just the rose. Take it over here because we're going to get a bit more of the reflection happening over there behind the blue. We've got all of that in first. Maybe a little bit back here. Doesn't matter, you can go right over your rocks. Your rocks are going to be darker, so that'll be fine. Now I'm going to get to my number 8 brush, and this is when I'm going to use the Prussian blue. And like I said, you can mix yourself something similar. And make sure you can see what I'm doing. Now, if your paper's wet, you don't want your paint and your brush to be too wet. So when I'm mixing this Prussian blue here, I want it to be much less water than I had on my brush before. And I want to tap my brush off so it's not, I've got a cloth here, so it's not too wet. That way, when I put the paint on, I'm going to add a little bit more water. it will be diluted by the water that's already on my paper. And I want to go side to side with big, long strokes. I don't want you doing this. Like, don't paint like little strokes like this. Get a good size brush, an 8 is good. Roll it in the paint, get it well filled with paint, and go from one side all the way over to the other side. And we're going to keep doing that. And don't have it too dark. Don't want it too dark. And then when we come down here, you have to be careful because you don't want to go over your pink. You want to come in to the pink and just let it blend. Just let it blend wet in wet. Come in from this side. Gently. Gently with that, and just let it blend with your pink. Don't go over your pink too much. I've got the point of my brush now, lifted my brush up. I just have the point, and I'm just bringing it into the pink. A little bit of orange there, just so that I get a little bit of blending wet in wet. And the key is, do not go back over this. If you think your paint's too dark, don't go in with some water or a wet brush. If you think your paper's not wet enough, don't wet it after you've put the paint down. Wait until this is dry if you need to do that kind of a thing. And I do want to be a little bit careful of my moon. So I'm just going to, with a little Kleenex, just like dab a little bit of the paint off of there because I don't want it seeping underneath like it did last time. Right, so I'm just dabbing off a little bit of the extra paint. Another thing you can sometimes do is just very gently get some of the paint off your tape so it doesn't run back into your painting. But I don't have much paint on my tape, so I shouldn't get too much of a run back. And I can still see some white paper glowing through mine. It's not always glowing through, but it dries a little bit differently. So, and it's different each time. So that's the first stage done. And then I'm going to put that to one side, and then I will go on to the triad and color mixing exercise. Now, what I'm going to do, we're recording again. I've made myself a triangle to make this easier. And because they're triads and I just feel a triangle works for a triad. Triad means 3 colors. That's all. You can have a primary triad, which will be red, yellow, and blue. You can have any type of a triad. You can have secondary color triads. You can have red, green, and yellow. You can have orange, green, and red. You can choose, but we'll stick to mostly the primary triads. And I just use this to trace, because I want my journal neat. It depends. If you're not worried about neat journals, that's fine. I've got a halfway mark on there. This is 12 centimeters equilateral with 6 centimeters marked off. And I have some nice handy dandy little stencils that work great for me, but you can use a lid of a milk carton. You can use anything that's circular, or you can just draw it by hand. You don't have to be doing a perfect drawing. So for my 3 main triad colors, I will use the big circle on here. And then I want to mix some other colors. So I have this little one. You can get these all over the place, these little, from stationery stores and art stores and online. I'm going to use 3 smaller circles for my 3 mixing circles. And these things are getting in the way. My center markings are great because I have center markings on this. It's got center markings on here, so I can get those kind of lined up. Okay. I'm not usually a very fussy person, but because I wanted it to be a nice handmade journal with fun stuff in, I wanted to keep it kind of a little bit neat just for that reason. Now, I don't have any rectangles on this, but I have squares. So I know from way back that I think 2 squares will probably make a rectangle. So I do a half a square, move it along, do the other half of the square, And I have a pretty good rectangle that's going to be the same for all of them because I'm just tracing through, which makes it really easy. I could find all kinds of shapes in these, and I couldn't find one with rectangles on, strangely. Just for ease, just to make it quicker. So these are for the neutral colors, and these are for the primary colors. I just want to get rid of some of my lines. Now, what you can do, and I have a waterproof pen here. Now, if you wanted to, you could have a line going through these so you could see how transparent the colors turned out if you wanted. I'm going to do that. I haven't done it before. I'm just going to try that out because the black line will show you how opaque or transparent your paint is. So that may be something that I would like to do. We're going to have, for this one, we're going to do the quinacridone rose, which is also called permanent rose. And that is, pretty sure that's PB19. I just have to make sure I get this right, because you know how your brain just, it sometimes gives up on you when you're trying to do 3 things at once. So PB19 is what almost everyone makes their quinacridone rose or permanent rose from. That's the code for the chemical that they use. We're going to do Prussian blue if you have it. If you don't have it, use one of your blues, whatever you want to. My Prussian blue is pigment blue 27 is the chemical that they use. And I'm using my Azo Yellow. You use what yellow you have, and that is pigment yellow 151. Now, these codes are what all the manufacturers use so they know what chemicals to use to make these colors. And they're really informative because you can buy 6 brands of paint, and one of those brands of paint will use a different chemical and it will make it a much better color, which is so interesting. For instance, and I love Winsor & Newton's Burnt Sienna, and I never knew why I loved Winsor & Newton's Burnt Sienna the most until I tried lots of other burnt siennas. Where are they? I have them all here. And I documented, so this is Daniel Smith's Burnt Sienna, which is pigment brown 7. This is Winsor & Newton's Burnt Sienna, which is pigment red 101. This is M. Graham's Burnt Sienna, which is pigment brown 7. And then this is Daniel Smith's Transparent Red Oxide, which is pigment red 101, the same as Winsor & Newton's Burnt Sienna. And then there's the Cotman Burnt Sienna, which is permanent red 101 as well. So they use a different pigment for the same name. So if you don't know what your pigment is, you don't actually know what you're getting. And this dot here is just a glue on the paper or something. But Winsor & Newton's Burnt Sienna is by far the most beautiful of all of them. And now I found out why. I didn't know before that they used a different pigment to everybody else to make it. Right, so I've got those there. These down here are going to be my neutrals. And you are going to get your paint. And this is why it's so relaxing, because you don't really have to do much thinking or worrying. You're going to get your, I'd start with your yellow because it's your lightest one, most likely to get contaminated with your water and your brush. Mine already is. My brush has still got some blue on it. I've already contaminated mine. And you're going to paint in your little yellow circle here. So easy, like nothing much to it, just nice, relaxing, full strength. And I want to get my, and again, most of the people that make quinacridone rose or permanent rose use PB19, pigment violet 19. But for some reason, Winsor & Newton's is the clearest, most beautiful one of all of them. I don't know how they managed to get it so beautiful, and it's not as staining as some of the others. Some of the others really stain, you can't lift them. But Winsor & Newton's one doesn't seem to stain so much. And literally you can make so many colors with this permanent rose. Now, for those of you that don't have the colors I have, and I said you don't need them, But I did say to Evie, you might find that after a few weeks, there's a few that you really want to go and buy because you realize why they're so beautiful and why they are just kind of essential. And Prussian blue. So Prussian blue is very different to either phthalo or ultramarine, and it makes beautiful greens, or you can get some beautiful greens with Prussian blue. Very versatile. Now, this is very cheap paper in this book. This is not cotton paper. It doesn't take paint very well, but it's okay for doing this. This is not my good journal. I've already done this one and that one. So you get your 3 full strength colors. And sometimes what I like to do is water that down and just put a little watered down one to show what it looks like when you have water added. It's kind of helpful. Now we've got those. We're going to start mixing them and start with your lightest color. Your lightest color here is your yellow, whichever yellow you used. And you have to be very careful adding blue to yellow because it's going to overwhelm it very quickly. So get a tiny, tiny bit of Prussian blue and add it to your yellow until you get a really vibrant light green. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because I have a much smaller circle. And right next to the yellow, because it's mostly yellow, this one, you're going to put that mix. And you could have it even more yellow than that if you wanted to. I'm going to add a bit more yellow to mine, get it a little bit more yellow. And the black line underneath will show you how transparent your mix is. Because if it's nice and transparent, you'll be able to see the black line very clearly through it. I'm going to just water that down a little bit and show a watered down version. Now I'm going to add a tiny bit more blue, tiny bit more. Remember, blue overwhelms it very quickly. And I'm going to paint that in the middle. You literally can't do a 50-50 because the blue is intense and the yellow isn't. So you have to be very, very careful you don't add too much blue. And now closer to the blue, I'm going to add much more blue to get a nice dark green. And I tell you, this is why I hardly ever buy any green paint, because with a couple of blues and one yellow, you can get hundreds of different greens. Really pretty greens. And again, I'm going to just do a little watered down version of that. So I got 3 very pretty greens there, just using those 2 colors from our pink, blue, yellow triad. If you mix this rose with this yellow, you're going to get colors that are very close to cadmium red, a nice warm red. So we're going to do the same with this side, starting with the yellow. You're all going to need lots of clean water after you've done this, by the way. I'm on my 4th bucket of water. And let's bring it over here. Where's my yellow paint? There we go. Clean water for the yellow. And let's put the yellow here. And I want to add a tiny, tiny bit. And the rose is quite strong. So we're going to add, oops, see, it's very strong. And add a tiny bit of rose to that yellow. Just a tiny bit. And right next to the yellow here, because it's closest to yellow, we're going to put that color in. Then another little bit more rose to that yellow. And put that one in, which gives you a lovely rosy orange. Because we got 3 good transparent colors here. A little bit of water. I forgot to water the other one down, didn't I? A little bit of water. A little bit of water. And then more rose for the last one. Right here. And this should be a lovely bright, almost like a bright red, but a very, very transparent bright red, very similar to cadmium red. So that's why if you have 3 primary colors in this kind of color range, you can mix more colors than if you have the other color range, which is called the red, yellow, blue. This is called the cyan, whatever, I can't remember the other one, cyan, magenta, yellow range, which is much cooler, but you can mix more colors with it. Now, out of the rose and the blue, the rose is the less intense. So you're going to start with the rose on this one. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble mixing. So you'll start with your rose, and the blue is pretty strong. So little bit of blue with the rose, and that will be your first one close to the one that's most rose, goes close to the rose. Now you cannot mix a good violet unless you have either magenta or permanent rose. They are your violet mixing colors. Any of your other reds are too orange for mixing a nice violet color. So again, we're going to get a little bit of blue. And we've got a really lovely violet now for the middle one. Lovely, transparent, clear violets. And this blue will make a slightly darker violet than, say, phthalo blue. I've lost the other side of my circle there. Doesn't matter. Water it down a little bit. And then we add a lot more blue for here. And if you add a lot more blue, you get something very, very close to ultramarine blue. A much more warm violet blue. And watered down. And what I quite often like to do, just because that doesn't look artistic enough to me sometimes, or maybe it's too neat, I don't know. I'm not a neat person usually. I kind of like to do a wet in wet thing from here. I start with need a bit more rose. Start with my rose, and I go into my yellow. Just let them mix wet and wet, and go into my blue. And just kind of let them mix wet and wet. And I think this is just the part of me that finds the rest of it too neat, and I want to make it a bit more artistic. I don't know what that's about, but I just kind of like that. And you can see how the colors blend. You can also see too that this Azo Yellow tends to push other colors away, which is really good, because it means that if you've put some darker colors on and they're still wet, you can dump some yellow in there and it will start to push its way in and invade the other colors, which is often very useful. Now down here in the neutral zone, we're going to see what happens when you mix the 3 colors together. And what should happen is you're going to get a variety of browns and grays that are really interesting. So we're going to try, the first one is going to be an equal mix. You're going to try and make an equal mix of all 3 colors. And you just have to do it by guess. And then this one is going to be approximately 70% blue. Now, it's approximate. You just have to do your best. There's no science here. This one's going to be about 70% red or pink, and this one's going to be about 70% yellow. And it's, like I say, it's not an exact science. You just have to kind of get an amount on your brush and try and figure it out. I'm going to clean a space here. Got a little sponge handy to clean a space. Right, so we're going to start with the lightest color here. I'm going to get a brush full of yellow. Same brush size, brush full of pink. And that's how you kind of get equal amounts. Just same size brush, a brush full of blue. And then whatever I've mixed here is going to go in the equal mix. You can see how lovely and dark this one is. just from those 3 transparent colors. I'm going to pop that in there. It's kind of greeny. So, you know, if you wanted to make a dark that wasn't this green, you'd add just a little bit more of the pink. I'm going to wet my brush and start seeing what this looks like if I dilute it a little bit with water. See if I can get a really lovely light gray. Because this is very cheap paper, I'm not going to get a very clear transition. You can't with cheap paper, but that kind of shows you. I've just got a wet brush to pull out some of the color into the water. Now, if this 70% blue, it's just by guess and by golly. You get a teeny bit of yellow on the tip of your brush, a teeny bit of rose on the tip of your brush, and then you get a good brush full of blue. And if it looks just a bit too blue, you can add a little bit more rose, a little bit more yellow, and a bit more blue until you kind of get something that looks very, very blue. And we're going to put it in here. It'll be very dark because the Prussian blue is a very dark blue. And the rose, although it's not dark, it will really mix some good dark transparent colors. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous, really sort of dark gray green color. And I'm going to put some water at this end just to see what it looks like when you kind of get it a little bit diluted. Now I want one that's about 70% red. So we're going to get a little bit of yellow on the tip of the brush, a little bit of blue on the tip of the brush, and then a good full brush full of the pink. And try that one. Now you can manipulate these colors to make an almost a brown color. If you just manipulate how much of each one you use, you could get a lovely brown. So that's kind of like a dirty pink, dark pink. And now we're going to do mostly yellow. So we get a little bit of, tiny little bit of pink, wrong blue counting, tiny bit of blue, a bit more pink, and then a full big brush of yellow. And you're going to get a sort of a, something like a dirty yellow, but getting close to your yellow ochres and those kind of colors. Certainly if you added a little bit more pink, I'm just adding a bit more pink over here, you could get a warmer sort of a light brown. Quite a bit of a glare on the paint. I see. Lift that up a little bit. I'm adding a little bit of water. I've added a little bit more pink on one end. So this was the on the left end was mostly the yellow. Now you can really manipulate these neutrals. You can go back and forth, adding a little bit more blue, a little bit more red, a little bit more yellow, until you get a really big range of browns and grays with just 3 colors. And of course, every different color that you have in your triad is going to give you a different type. We'll do a different triad next week. You'll get different grays and different colors. There, we're recording now. So this time I was much more careful. I put my sticker on right before I started painting. I was a little bit careful with my water, and the paint didn't seep under this time. And I've removed it now because I want to continue on with the mountains and things like that. So I've got several things I could do second, but one of the things I'd like to put in now is the background mountains. And I don't want them too strong because they do need to be in the background. And we've got to have darker mountains coming forward into the foreground. So one thing that is easy to do at this point is to make these background mountains too dark. And you've got to think you've got to have a slightly darker one here and a slightly darker one here, and then even darker here. So you need to keep it pretty light. And you are going to be going over the Prussian blue. So you do have the Prussian blue in the background. And we're going to mix Prussian blue or whatever blue you're using with a little bit of rose, just to make it a little warmer blue. So I'm going to get I've got loads of paint now all over the place. I got some rose here, and let's get some Prussian blue in there. I don't want purple. I want a blue that is slightly warmer. That's all. And I don't want it too dark either. So once I've got that color, I'm going to add a little bit of water. And then this is crucial. You need to have somewhere a piece of paper that you can test this on. I got a piece of paper from the other day. I'm just going to test to see what dilution that is. I might need a little bit more water. And maybe that's a little better. It needs to be transparent. And remember, you've got the other color underneath. I'm going to go to a slightly smaller brush, my number 6 maybe. And I'm going to just try that out. I might need even a little bit more water. It's amazing with the blue underneath that you don't need much color. I'm going to try that out. Okay, let's put that back so you can see. This was my third try, and I think that is about right.
Just remind me what colors it was. Prussian blue and
Prussian blue and the rose, the quinacridone rose or permanent rose that we did in the triad. We're pretty much sticking to that triad, and then we're going to add a little bit of burnt sienna just for the forward rocks and things. So just the Prussian blue with a little bit of rose. So it's just a slightly warmer blue, quite a bit of water, because you're going right over the top of the Prussian blue. So that's already quite dark. I'm going to just zoom in a little bit, move it over. And just carefully work your way along the top, but don't go too far without filling in the bottom, because you will end up with a dry line that will be very distracting. What I see quite a few beginners do is they do this. They take their brush and they outline the tip of the mountain first. Well, by the time they get around to filling in the rest, this line has already dried. So they have a big, thick, dry line along the top. You have to fill in everything as you go. Now, you can fill in just the mountains behind here, or you can do the front ones as well. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to go behind these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just pull my brush down just like this, and that kind of gives treetops. This island that's closer has, you can actually see the treetops. So pull your brush as you go, pull it, fill it. I'm going back and filling it up with paint every few strokes. And I'm coming around this little island here. And then I'm just going back and just pulling down a few treetops, so that when I do that one, it's going to have some definition to it. Now, this little island in the back, I can go right over that one, because I'm just going to come back with a bit more paint later. Dipping in my paint again, filling my brush. Now, this is very, very dilute paint. Show it to you. It's really diluted, look. It's not very strong. And every few strokes, I'm rolling my brush in the paint so that you get it really nice and full of paint. For the calligraphers, it's like dipping your pen every, so many couple of letters. You've got to have it really loaded, or you're going to run out of paint or ink. And over to that side. Now, don't go back over it. Don't go back and add more color. Don't go back and add more paint, because that's when you get backgrounds and blooms and weird things happening with your paint. You don't get a nice even coat. What you can do is, if you want, you can pull down a few trees on this island too, for just a few, because the more you put your brush in that, the more you would disturb the paint and you'll get an uneven layer. And I was showing people here what happens. I see people on YouTube and they just keep painting more and more painting. And what you get is you get loads and loads of streaks. And quite often you get a bloom, a run back of water that happens more with, see this cheap paper, very cheap paper. And even painting very carefully, I got a run back with the water because the paper is so cheap, it doesn't stay evenly wet. So if you've got this happening, it could be that you have cheap paper. Now this is Fabriano paper. It's just pulp. It was $5.95 for this book, and it's great for just practicing in. But see, you know, even with an experienced painter, how difficult it is to use this paper without getting blooms. So that's where your paper really helps you. And this can all be drying as we move on to the next thing that we're going to do, which is put in some of the ocean color in the front here. I'm just going to check my notes, because every time I do this, I go with my painting instincts, whereas I really should be making sure that I follow my notes very carefully. So I'm going to just check them out. We've done the background mountains, and yep, it's okay. I think I got it right. And I don't want to brush again. I'm very cognizant that you might all be just catching up. Let's have a look at you. I'm going to look at my view here, see how you're doing. Okay, I've just hidden my thumbnail. Now for the foreground, we're going to use those same two colors, Prussian blue and the rose. We're going to add a little tiny bit of yellow so that we get a kind of a greeny blue for the waves, for the ocean. So I already have that color here. I already have a little bit of blue and pink. I'm going to add a little bit more. Get a little bit more blue and a tiny bit more pink. And then I'm going to add a tiny bit of the yellow to get a more greeny. And I'm going to go back and get a little bit more blue. You have to be kind of careful. Go back and forth till you get it how you want it. A little bit more blue. And I think that's going to be a fairly good greeny blue color for the ocean at the front. Now I have right here in front of me, I have a sponge to wipe my brush on, and I have a cloth to wipe my brush on, because one thing you need to do is control the water at all times, because if you have too much water on your brush, that's when you're going to get into trouble and have backgrounds. And I don't want a brush that's too big for this. I'm going to go with my number 8 and load it up with that color I just mixed. And the paper's dry. And we're going to do a dry brush technique. And I'm also going to tap it off on my cloth a little bit. Let's see here. And just check. Okay, that seems good. I don't want it too wet. I want to pull my brush across the paper very gently so that it skips. And I'm pulling my brush into that reflected color that we have there in kind of waves. So it has to be beautifully horizontal. Otherwise it won't look like waves. And as you get close to the orangey pink, you kind of lift your brush until it's just the point that is touching the paper. And the paper's, this is a cold press, so it's just medium rough. And it will give you a little bit of texture. I'm going to do the same from this side. I'm just lifting it up a little bit, and I'm going to just do this motion side to side without touching, and then put your brush down and touch and do this side to side motion with the brush touching and just see what you get. The very point of the brush will give you some nice little pointers into the reflections there. It doesn't matter if you don't get it dark enough at this point, because you can always do a darker layer later when you get some other parts into this. And also you can also do a little bit more reflection later. I just want to go a little bit darker over here, a little bit darker. The corner, it's really good to fill your corners up with slightly darker paint or something darker in the corners, just to stop the eye from disappearing out the corner of your painting. And I'm going to go over here and take a little bit. You can have more color and detail near the foreground. That pulls the eye forward into the foreground. And go slow and don't overdo it. Like, don't end up so that you've covered all of your reflections, because you can do more later if you want to. If any of it gets away from you and you feel it's too dark, you can wash your brush, get it nice and clean. And you can just, with your wet brush, if you want to, you can just ease a little bit of that paint in with a wet brush if you want to. Or if you just like that kind of wet watercolor look, take your dry brush across, get your wet brush, take a bit of water off, and just add a little wet brush to it. That'll give you a soft look and some hard lines too, two different types of look to it. So we're working our way gradually forward with the islands and the mountains, and it's really important that the background ones are dry. That's why we worked on this ocean part, so that we could let the background mountains dry a little bit. But I want to be sure that they are perfectly dry before I come in and do these middle ground islands there. So again, I'm going to pause and I'm going to mute, because I'm just going to give a quick whir with the hair dryer, and you can catch up with your painting while I do that. So we're starting off again, and now we're going to put in these middle islands here, and there's another one over here in the picture that I haven't drawn in very clearly. And we're going to add a little bit more paint and a little bit more yellow to it, so it's kind of getting a little bit greener as it comes towards us. In fact, I have some, I've got lots of them here, haven't I? I'm going to look at this one. If you can see on this one, I've got some in the background here that are more diluted. It's really just this more greeny blue color, but with a bit more water in, so that they fade into the background a bit more. So we're going to get the same mix we just had, the Prussian, mostly Prussian blue, with a tiny bit of rose. Sorry, I got to move my palette here. I've got too much stuff here as usual. Too much water, too much paint, too much everything. A little bit of rose to just take that blue down a notch, and then some yellow to make it a bit more green. And I have to go back and forth with this until I get the color I want. So a bit more blue, a little bit more rose, a little bit more yellow, too much yellow. It takes a few back and forth until you get it just right. And I think about there is getting good. And I have to test that too. I can't just go ahead and slap it on the paper without giving it a little test. And my testing paper. Let's see. I think it needs a little bit more pink in it. I think it needs to be a little bit more purpley. And I want to put a bit of water with that. Now, once I've mixed a color, I got the mix here, and I want to dilute it. I don't want to dilute the whole mix. I want to dilute a little bit. So I take a bit of water over to the side here, and this is my diluted side, and this over here on the left is my full strength side. So these are little tiny mountains in the back. So I'm going to a smaller number 4 brush, and I want to move your painting over, Caroline. I want to put these mountains in the background islands back here. I don't think I drew them in, or if I did, I can't see them. So I'm drawing these in with my brush. And they're going back here. And quite a bit of water with that mix. I want them to really fade back there. A little bit more water on my brush. And there are some back here. You'll see it's a similar color to the background mountains, but I've added just a tiny bit of yellow just to change it a little bit. There's some back here too. Now I've put those in, so I should be able to put this one in without too much bleeding into the other ones because it's going into dry up here. I'm going to take the mix that's a little bit stronger. I may add just a touch more yellow to it, just a touch more, just to green this up. Now to get those trees on this island, I'm going to use the point of my brush. See how I'm like poking my brush upwards? And that's going to give the trees at the top. And because this island's a little bit closer, you can see more detail. And then I don't want this to dry. I want to be able to put the bottom of this island in before those treetops dry. So we'll get that in. Move along. A few more treetops. And see, this mix is stronger now because this island is closer. So you're going to see more detail. You're going to see more color. The bottoms of these islands will be completely straight and horizontal because water finds its own horizontal, and you cannot show something sitting in water unless the bottom is completely horizontal and straight, especially on a small little picture like this. I think mine's a 5x7. You need a much bigger piece of paper if you're going to show any kind of curve to the land or anything like that. And over on this side, which I didn't draw in, there's a sort of an island here coming down. Just going to put that in with my brush. Pointy, pointy, pointy trees. Bottom of the island, we're going to add a little bit of brown to the bottom later. Let's pop that in. But what you want is this fading from light color to slightly darker to quite a bit darker. And then for these rocks, oh, I forgot a little island here. For these rocks, we're going to go quite dark. We're going to add some burnt sienna or whatever brown you have to make them a little bit darker. But I got to put this island here in first, which I forgot to do. And this island in the background is wet, so I really should have stopped and dried that before I did this. And that's the thing, if you've got time, you should make sure you dry each layer before you do the next layer. Otherwise you're going to get, I've got bleeding from this foreground one into this background one, which will change the dilution. I'm going to suck that up a bit with my brush. Washed my brush, dried my brush, made it what's called thirsty. And from this background island, I've sucked up a little bit of paint and moisture. Do a little fix on that one. Now, these foreground rocks barely touch any of those islands. So I can work on those without having to stop and dry and fiddle around too much. And I know, I'm sorry that there's a little bit of a glare off the lights when the paint is wet, but that will settle down pretty quickly. So the color I want to mix for these foreground rocks is that color I've just been using, or some Prussian blue, and I want to add some burnt sienna. This is sort of, I know we worked with the triad and we could keep just working with the triad, but it's going to be a very tricky mixing game. And sometimes it's just easier to grab something really useful like a burnt sienna and mix it in. So I'm doing the burnt sienna with the Prussian blue and whatever that mix was I just used. And get quite a bit of burnt sienna in there. You want a warmish tone for these foreground rocks. A little bit more of the Prussian. Or if you don't have burnt sienna, you can use burnt umber. You could use whatever kind of brown you've got. And if you wanted it to be a little bit more reddish or warm, just add some rose to it. Now I'm going to go down again in size in brush because we're going to teeny tiny islands. I have a number 2 brush here. So I'm going to go down because I've got to do some very small detail. So I'm going to load my brush up, roll my brush in that color, load it up. And now we're getting to darker foreground rocks. We're not using as much water with the paint. It's not as diluted. And the point, make sure you've got a brush with a nice point on so you can get really, really nice edges on your rocks here. And make sure they don't touch any of that wet paint that you just did. If they do go over that, wait and put the rocks that go over that in later. I want a little bit more burnt sienna in my mix. It doesn't look warm enough to me, so I'm going to add a little bit more burnt sienna. I'm a big fan of burnt sienna, probably one of my favorite colors. And I really like the Winsor & Newton because they use a red 101, pigment red 101, and not a brown pigment in theirs, which makes it so transparent and warm, which is what I really, really like. And now I'm putting mine on quite dark, but I'm going to do some lifting in a minute. It's easier when you're doing rocks or anything like this dark. It's easier to put your paint on and then lift it off afterwards, rather than if they're this small, to try and get different tones in your rocks is very, very hard. You can if they're bigger, they're much bigger rocks, but you have to be a genius to do it with something this tiny. And again, the bottom must be horizontal, completely straight. Otherwise, they don't look like they're sitting in the water. There's some little rocks back here. Let's pop those in. There's some back here too, but I just wanted to wait till the paint was dry to do those. Now I've got wet paint on. You can see it's quite shiny. I'm going to wash my brush and dry it on my cloth. And on some of those rocks, I'm going to suck off a little tiny bit of the paint to give a highlight just to the tops of those rocks. And this is a much easier way to get 2 tones in tiny rocks like this. Just going to take a little bit of the paint off on some of the highlights. Now, of course, if the moon is here and it's shining down here, the lights on the rocks will be facing the moonlight, and they'll be dying sunlight too. Once this paint over here is quite dry, I can still lift it off, but I'll need a bit of a Kleenex to do that, and it will make a bit more of a light top. And if I find that's too light, I can go back in with a bit more paint. So I've just lifted off a tiny little bit of the paint to give a sort of a 3-dimensional look to these rocks. When this is dry, I can also add a little bit of shadow with just a bit of Prussian blue. But there are more rocks in the ocean here. There's these ones here. So I want to put these in. They're not, there's some over here too. They're not all connected, you know, they may be connected, of course, under the ocean, but the tide has come in and they're no longer connected. So there's some spaces. Spaces are a wonderful thing in composition for the eye to just rest and like see between, just the spaces between these islands are really enjoyable for the eye to look at, not have everything joined up. And again, I'm being very careful not to touch the paint in the islands above because it will bleed. Later on in this series of 8 lessons, we are going to do a painting where everything bleeds together and you can go a bit wild with it. I don't think any of us are ready for that yet. I don't think I am, quite frankly. I think I need a little bit more warming up to teaching time before I attempt that. And so we've got a few more close to you. There's one back here that I think this paint's dry enough for me to put in now. Kind of here where these trees are. There's a little one back here. Very, very tiny. It's back there. There's some in here. A couple just like almost dots with your brush. And then I'm going to take a few of those highlights off again with my thirsty brush. I think there's a little one here. Now it's up to you at this point. Now that you've got those darks in, you might feel that your ocean is not quite dark enough, or you might feel that your moon reflections are not quite bright enough, or you may feel they're just perfect. But there's nothing wrong with, at this point, getting a really, really, I'm going to show you the wash. I got a wash of the rose and the tiny bit of yellow, and I'm just going to do a little bit more color. Just trying to get my wash just exactly the right strength. I'm going to, oops, that's way too strong. Bit more water added here, bit more water. I'm just going to add a bit more color. Like I said, I started off too strong with my mix. I'll bring a bit in here. And it's always difficult to judge how much color you need at the start. So it's better to go light at the start and add a little bit more later if you want to. And I've gone on dry paper with quite a wet mix and just put a little bit more color. I'm going to take my really tiny, tiny brush, my number 2, and I might, careful, don't touch the brown rocks. I might put a little bit, I've got my tiny brush again, put a little bit in here, just to get a bit more in. And I think I would like on mine, I would like my ocean a bit darker. So again, I've got to go back to my Prussian blue, and I don't want to use the rock mix. Let's put the Prussian blue on the rose that I just used. And just let's go with Prussian blue for the moment with that tiny bit of rose there. And it doesn't matter that that rose is wet that I just put on, because that will just do a wet in wet thing. And I might just put a little bit more color on. Just in the foreground, a little bit more drama. Not too much, just a little bit. Now at this point, I don't have much more left to do, but I don't want to leave my moon white, even though the moon will look white once it gets high in the sky. At this time of day, and I've been kayaking at this time of day when the moon rises, the sun is still reflecting, the sunset is reflecting on the moon, and it often comes up a bright orange color, a bright red color. It's very deep color when it comes up. So I want to make sure that my moon in this picture is really, really colorful. So I'm going to use just my pure yellow. to start with very clean water. I make sure my brush is really, really clean. And some yellow. And I'm going to put that, make sure I get that strong enough. I don't want it to look too much like a sun, but carefully going to put that yellow on. It's not going to stay just yellow, don't worry. At some point, I'm going to put a little bit of the peachy rose in there to make these kind of shadows on it. I need to let this yellow soak in a little bit and dry just a tiny bit. And I need to get a sort of a peachy rose color ready. I got two palettes going on here. I got a warm palette and a cool palette. I have to keep grabbing one or the other. And I'm going to add a little bit of rose to that yellow to make that kind of a peachy rose color, a bit more rose. And I don't want it too wet. My moon is already wet. I don't want to use it while it's too wet. What I want to do is what's called, what is it called, Caroline? It's got a name. Oh, it's got a name. It'll come to me. Old lady brain. Charging, that's what it's called. It's called charging. And you're going to charge this color in just with the point of your brush. And I'm going to do a little bit to see how wet is the yellow. Is it going to charge in okay? It wants to just go in a small distance, but what I don't want is I don't want it like charging in all over the place. I've got a Kleenex in my hand. I've dried my brush on the Kleenex so I can just kind of dab my brush into it and encourage it to be not too overpowering for the moon. Get a little bit more on the tip of my brush. And I'm going to go a little further away from that. And I'm just touching the tip of my brush to the yellow, which has been soaking in for about a minute and drying. And then I'm just going to touch in a little bit of that peachy rose color. And you can keep manipulating that a little bit as your yellow dries. You can manipulate it. Now, if you don't have cotton paper like I have, you may find that your paints dry much, much quicker because the the pulp paper doesn't hold on to the water as well. So you're going to have to really judge your paper and whether this is going to work. So I'm just charging in a little bit more, just encouraging that to move a bit. And then I'm going to leave it alone to kind of do its own thing. And I have a little bit of that color there. Maybe I'll just have a little bit more of that color. I've got the color in my palette. A little bit more just here. So it's a little stronger right under the moonrise. And we're done a little bit early today. I thought it'd take way longer with the triad, but you're probably not keeping up to me. You're probably still furiously trying to keep up. And that's the thing with the Zoom. I really have trouble knowing what stage you're at. So I just kind of plow on. But one more thing I want to do before I'm finished is I have some white paint and I want to put a little bit of white paint splashing against these rocks here. And so I want to make sure everything's dry before I do that. So all I need to do now is add a few finishing touches to this painting. And I'd like to add a little bit of surf breaking on the rocks. And to do this, my preferred method is the Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's lovely and opaque, and it's great for fixing mistakes too. And I like to dilute it on a separate dish. I don't want to put the white in my palette because it will contaminate my other paints. So I'm going to get some water. You can re-wet it again if it's dried out. It's just like ordinary watercolor, but it's beautiful and opaque and just matches your watercolor paper nicely. So I've got some in there. I'll take a little bit more. A jar of this although it's expensive, will last you for years. And if it dries up, you just add some water and stir it up. It's good for a long, long time. So I've just mixed a little bit of that up. So it's quite a thick, sort of creamy paint. And I have a very small brush. It's a 000 brush, very tiny. And I've done a couple of these. I've got this one here, which I've put a little bit of white on, this one. And I have another one, lots of samples that I've been painting. And with this tiny, tiny brush, making sure I have something to wipe off any excess paints. I don't want too much. I'm going to put a little bit of spray, just hitting the rocks here. That was in the photo. And just a few highlights on the water as well. Don't overdo it. If you overdo something like this, then it kind of stands out as a bit odd and awkward in your painting. That just, the ones that are close to you, because you will see that. And this in the distance, you wouldn't see this going on in the distance. You can add a little bit of highlight on the water if you want to get some. I'm just looking, I don't have my reference photo in front of me, so I'm just sort of going by my other painting. I think there's a little bit on here. You could mask this off with masking fluid before you start, but masking fluid is really difficult to manipulate, and you would probably get these ugly white blobs that would stand out and you'd have trouble covering. Whereas if you've got a little bit of this white paint, you could just put in some very delicate little splashes on the rocks, and don't overdo it. Just a little tiny bit, a little wave breaking here, maybe a little bit of highlight. Now, what happened to one of my paintings was I got some bleed through on the moon from the sticker. So what I did with that one was I took some of this P.H. Martin's white, and I a bit more carefully than I'm doing here, painted out the moon again in white and let that dry. And then I was able to go over it with the yellow and fix it. And you couldn't see where the paint bled through. So it's really, really great for fixing mistakes too, or for putting like little highlights on at the end. Really, really difficult to do with watercolor. One other method you can use is a pastel pencil. They are pretty good for putting on some highlights at the end too. It's just they're $2 or $3. They're not expensive. You can usually buy them in individual colors. And where's my I had one here that was sort of messy to show you. That's gone. I'll show you on this one because this one's a bit messy too. I'll just show you on here. Of course, you wouldn't put the line on here, but I'll show you how the pastel pencil really shows up well on darker paint. And if you just had one of those, if you didn't want to buy a bottle of P.H. Martin's white, but you just had a couple of dollars, or you have a pastel pencil, you can use that to put in a little bit of surf breaking along the rocks too. And that looks great. You might want to spray the pastel pencil with a bit of fixative to keep it from brushing off. But the texture of the watercolor paper holds on to it quite well. And you can get them in many colors. And it is a beautiful way to put some highlights on a finished watercolor without having to resort to acrylic paint. Acrylic paint looks so different to watercolor that it gives it an odd look to put that on. You can use gouache, which is an opaque watercolor. And I do have some gouache white, but it's not as nice as the P.H. Martin's white. It's not as opaque. I mean, this is really covered well, and I can paint over it. And if you want to, you can also mix the P.H. Martin's white with your watercolors, not in your regular palette. You don't want to contaminate the transparency. So I'm just going to use this little ceramic palette here. And supposing I wanted a really delicate pink, and I can get my rose paint and I can mix a very delicate opaque pink. And again, I'm going to paint on this one. It's not a good one. And if I wanted to get some very opaque colors on at the end, on top of the transparent colors, I could use the PH Martin's white mixed with any of my regular watercolors because it is a water soluble paint. And I have a big variety of pastel pencils in light colors. Like this is a beautiful light yellow. I have a very creamy, sort of a creamy beige color. I have lovely creamy pink color. A beautiful one that's great for spring grass and spring trees, a beautiful lime green. These are all pastel pencils. And of course you can smudge them on the paper to give a very soft, smoky look to them. And it is better if they get a bit of a spray with fixative. You can buy fixative that's safe for watercolor. You don't usually use it because you don't need it. But if you have some pastel on there, it's maybe a good idea. And you can get these pencils in any color, like there's a bright, really bright red, all the colors. And I buy them just individually from the art store. The light gray is beautiful for over the top of watercolors. There's a yellow ochre. You can add little flowers at the end of your painting. It goes on and on, but it will be mixed media. Once you've put something like a pastel pencil on, it's no longer pure watercolor, it's mixed media. But I literally don't bother about that because I hardly ever need to show my paintings. They're all for class. If I have them in a show, I just write on the label mixed media. If I'm doing a commission, I just make sure people know that it may be mixed media if I do that. And usually people don't mind if you're doing a commission, they just want it to turn out well. So there you go. And don't be too precious about your paintings. Look, I did loads of these to try and get it right. I've done loads of these as demonstrations. And if you don't get too precious about just one of them and you kind of use it to practice on and mark it up and do stuff on, then you will feel more free and less anxious about getting it right the first time. You hardly ever get it right the first time, especially if this is your first lesson or your first go at painting after a long break. It takes a while to get the hang of it. So hang in there, do your best, do it again if you didn't like your first one. Don't get upset, don't get anxious, just try and enjoy the whole process. And remember, it's a learning journey. These are not gallery pictures, these are not a commission for someone. This is a learning process. So just enjoy the learning. And I'll see you next time for the next painting. Thank you. Well, I hope you were off to a great start for our first lesson. And I hope you enjoyed painting today. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.